Okay, welcome everyone, both for everyone here in person and for everyone on Zoom. We're glad to have you guys here today. Thank you for joining us for our special workshop on being intentional with your end of life planning. My name's Paige. I'm the charitable giving manager here at Vivalon. And I want to especially thank our sponsors of our monthly estate planning workshop series, Valley Memorial Park Cemetery and Funeral Home. And Sherry Jacobs is here. And also Lorena is here and she is presenting today. So, and Carrie Spence Estate Plans is another sponsor. Before we get started, I'd like to ask, is anybody here at Vivalon for the first time today? Oh, a few of you. Welcome, welcome. Glad to have you here. Please come back another time, get a tour of the building, have lunch in our cafe, learn about all the wonderful programs we have to help people age, myself included, with health and vitality. And so we'd love to have you come back. Today's workshop is actually part of our monthly estate planning series. We do a different workshop every month. On your way out, you can grab a flyer for our next upcoming workshops. And we bring every month we bring experts in to share their expertise in financial and estate planning to help you get your affairs in order. Part of making your will and trust is the opportunity to create your legacy, which is a beautiful way to honor the organizations you care most about. Every year, Vivalon, we get wonderful bequests from people's wills that allow us to keep doing these great programs, deliver meals for Meals on Wheels, and give rides to our older neighbors. So we would be honored if anyone is interested in considering leaving a gift in their estate plan to Vivalon. But let's get on to our topic of the day. So I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today. We're doing this new style, this interview style, and we're going to encourage you to ask questions, but we'd love for you to put your questions on the note cards. There's note cards and pens in your chair. And then either myself or one of my colleagues, Amy, Yvonne, or Juliet will come around and collect your questions. And if you're on Zoom, you can put your question in the chat and we'll get it transcribed and we'll try to get everyone's questions answered today. So with no further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Sarah Hill, the East Bay doula. Like a birth doula that supports the incoming new life, Sarah supports those at life's end, offering practical tools and deep reflections to help you face death with clarity, courage, and intention. Also, we have Lorena Lupercio-Diaz, who's the funeral director at Valley Memorial and one of our sponsors. Lorena is going to cover topics like how to talk with your family about your wishes, what are the next of kin laws in California, advanced healthcare directives, and burial and cremation options, including green burial and veterans benefits. And moderating today's event is Vivalon's own CEO, Kaushik Roy. Among his many accomplishments and achievements, Kaushik is also a graduate of the Meta Institute's End of Life Care Practitioner Program, really reflecting his deep commitment to compassion and service to our older adults in the community. And we're really pleased to have him leading us here at Vivalon. So with no further ado, let's give our guest a warm welcome and hear what we got.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. As Paige mentioned, my name is Kaushik. I was looking through my calendar on my phone a moment ago. I'm either in week 16 or 17 on the job, and it's been a terrific 4 months. I'm having a blast. And before we jump into what I think will be a very insightful conversation, I do just want to say I am so thrilled to be here. And in my mind, Vivalon represents what is right in the world right now. And it's a world that gives all its attention on what's not right. And so we really need places like Vivalon. I really think we are an antidote to so much of what ails our country right now. And I was talking to someone the other day and they were asking about how things were going. And I said, I think one of the meaningful things you can do for those of us who are lucky enough to choose what we do for a living, because the majority of the world does not have that choice, is work for a society that does not leave anyone behind. And we have, unfortunately, my opinion only, We have leadership that's trying to leave a lot of people behind in this country. And so places like Vivalon are needed more than ever. So I just want to, on behalf of Vivalon, thank you all so much for joining us at our home and being here for this great conversation. So as Paige mentioned, I just want to say a couple of things very quickly about my connection and interest to end-of-life work. My first, in a previous life, I ran a nonprofit in San Francisco called Shanti Project for 15 years. Some of you may have heard of it. It was probably the first HIV organization, not only in the area, but possibly in the world. The founder there was the first mental health professional at the UCSF Medical School Cancer Ward. So, of course, when AIDS hit, San Francisco was one of the epicenters, and Shanti was an organization that led the response. So that was where I first started volunteering and where I really had an interest in working with people who might have serious illness or were at the end of life. And I think that death is one of the most confounding topics in our society for so many reasons. We have understandably so many strong feelings that come out when we think about the idea of death or our own mortality. I just want to share a quick story which I think really encapsulates that. There is a ancient Indian epic called the Mahaparaa. It is, they say, between 3,000 and 5,000 years old, and it's considered to be the longest poem that has been discovered, even longer than some of the ancient Greek poems we're probably more familiar with. And like so many of the stories of that time, one of the protagonists' father is a god, the god of righteousness, and his mother is a mortal woman. And during this book, he has to basically pass a test or a quiz. And it really is this beautiful, eloquent exposition on really philosophy and some of the bigger questions about life. And the questions are just beautiful. It's like, what is it that when renounced earns a person true respect? And the answer is pride, when renounced, earns a person true respect. Who is truly wealthy? One who is content with what they have is truly wealthy. What is it that, when lost, brings joy and not sorrow? Anger, when lost, brings joy and not sorrow. So it's this incredible series of questions. And the very last question that the questioner, who is the God of righteousness, the father of the protagonist in disguise, says, what is the most unbelievable thing about being human? And the answer is, every day people wake up and they look around and they see others entering the abode of death. Yet somehow in their heart of hearts, they think, maybe, just maybe, it won't be me. Right? And I think that really captures attitudes we've had towards death, probably all of us at some points in our lives. Now, the fact that you're here probably means you have more openness and interest and have given more thought to the topic. I always personally thought that living a full life required some thought about end of life. In fact, in Burma, there is a saying that a truly happy person stops and contemplates death at least twice a day, because that's what really gives joy and happiness, to have those reflections. And as Paige mentioned, I had a chance to do one of the most incredible things, which was to go through a program called the Metta Institute. It was a 9-month program, 32 residential days, and it was founded by the founder of Zen Hospice Project, Frank Ostaseski. There were so many incredible teachers. Ram Dass, some of you might be familiar with him. He was the other professor at Harvard who dropped acid and got kicked out, and then he went to India and became a guru, along with Timothy Leary. And one of the Zen poems that were shared, it really struck with me, and I'll just share that, and then we'll move on to the conversation, which is to always be aware of the great matter of birth and death. Time passes so quickly, so swiftly. Wake up, wake up. Do not let your life pass you by. And I think it's easy to not think about death and realize that you're not living a full life. So I'm going to use that as a segue to really let Lorena and Sarah, who will hopefully do the vast majority of the talking here on out, introduce themselves. And so before we do that, we really want to make sure this is a conversation that is beneficial and relevant to all of you. I had a chance to meet with the two ladies a couple of weeks ago, and I realized the one thing I should just do is once they start talking, not say much, because it was such a fruitful conversation just to listen to them. But I just want to take a couple moments, if I can, and just ask around the room by a show of hands if anyone wants to raise their hand and just share what brought you into the room today. Is there anything in particular that caught your fancy or piqued your interest, or that you might want to make sure we touch upon today? Please raise your hand, and please don't be bashful.
So as I see more of my friends having cognitive issues, it's not so much death I am worried about. It's my cognitive decline that might come up. And I feel as though the same amount of planning has to be made for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I'd love to hear from another person or two if possible. What brought you into the room today?
So I had a friend in another state who was having serious cognitive difficulties, but her daughter, when her daughter and I spoke, a friend of her daughter's happened to be a death doula. And I was absolutely intrigued by the idea. I didn't know, I was sure it was available. Such a person would be available here in California, but I didn't really know anything about that. So that was what brought me here today.
I'm involved here at Vivalon. I teach a class and I'm amongst my people here. And the concept of the death doula also was very interesting because there's so many women who live alone. And I have family, I have friends. I was a birth doula. I delivered babies, and I just love the idea of it and would love to know more about it and how we could use it to help our friends.
Anybody else? See a couple more hands.
I need to update advanced healthcare directives, get power of attorney for finances done, and appoint some new agents. So I've just been dragging my feet, and I'm hoping this will push me over the line to update everything. Thank you.
I'm sure you're not the only one. Thank you for sharing that.
That's right.
I agree.
I saw one other hand back.
Hi, of course, I'm Sherry Jacobs, and I do work for Valley Memorial Park. And I'm the marketing community outreach person. And I don't know how many times I'm out in the community saying to people, hey, have you heard of Valley Memorial Park? And they look at me like, no, it's not happening now. It's not happening. Go away. And the thing is it is going to happen. And we have to take that conversation to the table with our families, our spouse, our friends. And so that's why Valley's always out in the community, because it is something that is going to happen. And you do need to be pre-planned, have that conversation with your family, at least just the conversation. And I think sometimes once you've done that, it feels a little better and you feel lighter and maybe you can accept it more. So that's why Valley does what we do.
Thank you, everyone who raised their hands and shared. All right, now we're going to have a chance to listen from the stars and the experts here. I think it's safe to say that working in the death field may not necessarily be for everyone. And I have often found that those who do have some very particular circumstances or stories in their life that have prompted them to be in this field of work or line of work. And so I was hoping each of you could take a turn and introduce yourselves a little bit and really maybe share what compelled you or motivated you to want to be in the line of work you are in right now. And why did you feel a calling to this kind of work if you did?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to share first. Again, my name is Lorena, and I am a funeral director and pre-planning advisor at Valley Memorial Park in Novato. And I feel very lucky to do this work. My background is actually in teaching secondary education. That was my first career, a more traditional path, I'd say. But this was always in the back of my mind. I grew up in Southern California in a very active Catholic church community. My mother was actually very, very involved, and it was part of her ministry to care for folks and provide support to grieving families. We attended most of the funerals in our community, and I had a chance to, as a child, just be by her side and see how she interacted with folks and really got a different perspective. She really instilled in me that this is one of those things that is kind of overlooked in our society. It's one of those behind the scenes things that we don't like to talk about, that make us feel uncomfortable and uneasy, regardless of our socioeconomic or educational background. It's not something that comes easily to us. And she mentioned that, you know, folks feel very awkward around these things. So she said, you really have to be there for people. Sometimes just showing up means the world to folks who are going through something like this. So just being in that kind of environment really got me thinking about these things. And when I had the opportunity to explore a second career, this came to the top. And I said, how on earth do you get into this, right? So I explored some opportunities. I started out in Sacramento and started at a funeral home there. And I've had a chance to work at various places in the state and in the Bay Area. And I feel very blessed to now be at Valley Memorial Park, offering the support and being able to transfer my skills and my teaching background, really educating folks on what it is to pre-plan and talk about these things, even if it's on an individual basis, or sometimes the entire family will come out and we'll be able to, you know, discuss people's wishes and explore their options. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's amazing, the synergy and parallelism there. So I think the way to talk about how I became a death doula is to say that it really began for me in early childhood. My mom died at the age of 4. I was with her at the time. She had a cerebral hemorrhage. And to say that that was one of the most foundational experiences of my life is certainly an understatement. But it wasn't so much her death, it's kind of what happened afterward. You know, I, being so young, I didn't have the kind of gift of death denial, right? It was so apparent to me that this was coming for everyone, including me and everybody I loved. And so it kind of wired me perhaps a little bit differently, and maybe a little bit like Lorena, just in a different capacity or different facet. And I just have to say, your mom, what a gift she gave you. What a beautiful gift. For me, you know, it was what I couldn't talk about. My mom died, she was gone, and we don't talk about it anymore. People would whisper around me. I kind of got a bit of a complex, thinking maybe I was strange. And only through my own development did I realize I had become a canvas for everybody else's kind of projected fears around the one thing that is going to happen to all of us, but we don't really like to think about or talk about, let alone admit to ourselves. And so strangely enough, the intimacy that I wanted with my mom over time translated to me wanting to go into cemeteries as a teenager. And again, my friends would say, you're so edgy and macabre, and that's weird, or emo. And I always thought that was strange. I'm like, no, I go into a cemetery because it gives me perspective. Each of these tombstones stands in for a full, beautiful life that somebody had. It tells that there was a moment in time that this person walked the earth. And whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed by life, there was something about being, for instance, in the cemetery that let me know I was part of something larger than just individual me. I was connected to the lives of people who came before, the human family, and it gave me peace. So fast forward to where we are today. I had a whole other career too, doing corporate change management. Arguably, you can say this is the largest change any of us are going to manage. And the truth of the matter is, manage a change. We all know how well that goes in corporate sector. And, similarly here, we have to give ourselves grace in the process. It's going to do its own way of doing it. But I think what happened was my curiosity about dying and death allows me to sit very deeply with people who are facing serious illness and terminal diagnoses. I don't shy away from that conversation. And when I realized that I could be of service in that way, when it really, really dawned on me, it took me to my mid-40s to fully appreciate and understand that. It was very clear. And then the role of the doula kind of found me, is what I like to say. And I was kind of on my way and haven't looked back since. But the truth of the matter is, there's no greater honor than to sit with somebody presently and to be with them in their experience of being in conversation with their mortality and what's going on. And it's informed my life in such beautiful ways. So, but thanks so much for having me here today.
Thank you for being here. As a couple of people noted a few moments ago, I think the idea of, or the occupation of death doula, is not one that a lot of people are intimately familiar with. And so I was wondering, perhaps you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Maybe a bit of just a technical definition of what is a death doula, and what your primary responsibilities or how you see your purpose.
Absolutely. So how many, just so I know, how many of you have heard of a death doula, just by show of hands? Okay. And I haven't forgotten you, our virtual audience. It's a relatively new role, even though it's an ancient one as well, right? But it's kind of had a resurgence. And I think COVID helped give some visibility to the role of the death doula too. I think some people are familiar with the work of a birth doula, who supports new life coming into the world. And likewise, death doulas help people leave their lives behind. The best way to think about the work that we do is we kind of tend to the emotional, psychological, and spiritual impact of dealing with serious illness or a terminal diagnosis. And I've thought about this for a really long time. Most of us, I should say too, a caveat there, most of us are not medically trained. We are not part of the healthcare system. We typically are independent and just kind of doing our own thing, sometimes in collectives, and we'll talk about that over time. But the way that I like to think about the work of the doula is we're tending to the work of the head, the hands, and the heart of one's dying time. And it doesn't mean that you have to be dying imminently. It can be really at any point that you want a more connected conversation with your mortality, right? And that's where we'll get into advanced planning through today's conversation. But the head work is, what do I need to be thinking about? What do I need to be planning for? What do I need to be strategizing? Who do I need to be having conversations with? What are the things that are going to become important to me when my dying time draws near? The handwork is the execution piece. What do I actually need to do? Do I need to do some advanced planning, get my advanced healthcare directive in order, and review it when we need new power of attorneys for healthcare or finance? Do I need to get a pre-planning with a funeral home? And Lorena will share a bit more about that. What's the work we need to be doing? And I do see a question here. No? Okay. And then, ideally, if you're working with a doula, if we tend to the work of the head and the hands as far upstream as we're able to, it creates spaciousness for what I call the good stuff, the heart work, the work of summing up our relationships and our connections. And part of one of the things that we do as doulas is we investigate what's left undone. How can we leave this life feeling any degree of completion? Are there any things we need to tend to? Relationships that need to be mended, things that need to be said, and really trying to give people an opportunity to do that. And, spoiler alert, that can happen anytime, right? So again, I think the work of the doula is really working with folks and kind of companioning alongside them, guiding them sometimes, stepping back and letting them lead when it's appropriate, but helping them take that really important step of getting in connection with the fact that they too are mortal and will die.
And following up on that a little bit, when do people typically engage you or engage a death doula?
Yeah. I think we largely in my community have kind of compared notes, and it's oftentimes when serious illness or a terminal diagnosis is in play. That's when most people find us, usually in a state of panic and crisis. and real worry and concern. But the truth of the matter is, you know, we've worked with people from an advanced planning capacity who didn't even have a serious illness in sight. They just wanted to kind of get a jump on things. But I would say by and large, more often than not, people are compelled to call us when serious illness is there. And then we travel with them. You know, this is another way to think of the death doula and the role. We're kind of like this through thread on someone's dying journey, right? Wherever we are engaged, let's say at the point of terminal diagnosis. And if we use the milestone markers of healthcare, right, we'll be with you while you're still trying to maybe even do curative measures or sustaining treatment. We'll support you through the kind of palliative care phase of managing what's happening for you and your body, all the way through to transitioning to hospice care and helping to kind of be the through thread on that process. And all the way to and through death. We'll be present with you in your active dying period, and then support where Lorena and her group pick up with postmortem activities.
Do you find that most of your clients are the folks who actually have a diagnosis or are dying? Or do you find that it's families oftentimes who reach out on behalf of someone?
Mm-hmm. So it can be all of the above, right? Sometimes we're contacted by people who are terminally ill and are dying. Sometimes it's a caregiver for them. We even have family friends reach out to us. But I think one of the things that I think about, maybe this is my change management background, is it's a whole system, right? So even though we center the person who is dying more often than not, you know, the constellation of care around them, think of a solar system, right? If we put the dying person in the center, you know, who is in that first tier around them? And how can we support them as well? And that second tier, even, however far out it's appropriate to go. Because for me to appropriately support a client, I have to make sure that I'm tending to the experience of all those who are touching my client, right? Because I can do a lot of great work with my client, but if there's somebody who is able to influence the experience, who needs support as well, and they're not being tended to, then that can throw the experience for everybody involved. But I would say I know doulas who have worked with primary caregivers as their primary kind of focus and client, where the dying person did not necessarily want to engage with them. But I would say by and large, most of us are working directly with the person who is dying.
You mentioned that, so I think especially for those of you who may have not been, came in a few moments late, you should have all have note cards on your chairs. And so if you have any questions, please write them down on the note cards and raise your hand, and one of the staff members will grab them, and we'll make sure we have a chance to have your questions answered. Sarah, what I'm curious about is, you mentioned that most people probably do not reach out to you until perhaps they've received a diagnosis that merits that or warrants that in their mind. Do you find, or are there advantages for people perhaps to reach out to you sooner or reach out to you before perhaps a diagnosis motivates them to?
I'm going to tell a story, if that's okay. So I have a 120-pound dog named Kiwi. She is a Limburger. It's like a Newfoundland for those of you who are dog breed aficionados. And I have her largely to do the work of the doula with me. Sometimes people like the company of a big furry animal even more than a human. And so I had her for a very specific reason. And one day, Kiwi and I were on a walk. I live in Alameda. And a gentleman came by on his recumbent bicycle. What kind of dog is that? Because she's quite fetching. And so I said, well, she's a Limburger, and I did the whole pitch. And I told him that she has a special dog working with people at end of life. And he got very curious about it. So I explained that I was a death doula. And he said, wait a minute. You can have a dog with you when you're when you're actively dying, like that's okay. I'm like, absolutely. He said, put it in your advance directive, make sure that your power of attorney for healthcare knows about it. I know plenty of people who have snuck dogs into hospitals. You didn't hear it here. But anyhow, yes, if you'd like that. So we ran into one another at a dog park about 4 weeks later, and he came up to me with his beautiful dog. And he said, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. He said, you know, I was asked to sit at the bedside of a friend of mine. His wife needed a break. And so she had left and it was just the two of us alone. And I was terrified. And I realized that's not right, because someday I'm going to have to do this. And my relationship with death is not right. And he said, would you work with me? So we started with advanced healthcare directives, updated his along with his partner, who is amazing. She came along and did hers too. And then from there, it progressed. He said, I want more. So we started to do something that we call life review, which is something I do with my dying clients. Let's look back on our life in decade increments, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. What are those staccato moments that peak up for you? The good, the bad, the indifferent. Let's tell our life story and see what we see. And through this process, it became such a rich kind of experience for him. He started to videotape himself using Zoom on a closed recording, telling his life story. And he started to see patterns and themes to his life he hadn't seen before. Long story short, what I would say about it is his partner, at some point, she had a dear friend of hers who was dying and on hospice care. And he asked to have coffee with me after the visit with her. And he said, Sarah, you're never going to believe it. When I saw Mary, I wasn't afraid. I knew how to talk to her. I knew how to ask her how it was for her, what she was worried about, what was on her mind, what was on her heart. He said, I felt the most capable and enabled person in the room. And largely it's because he took that time to do that death contemplation for himself. So yes, I'm happy to say there are great advantages for engaging a doula at any point.
That really struck me, the exercise of the life review. I imagine that must be almost overwhelmingly profound and powerful for some of your clients, and very humbling for you to be a part of that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Are there the emotional support and the emotional skills that the person in your story received, and I'm sure others do, sounds immensely beneficial, as you described. Are there other practical benefits too, you think, that someone who may be thinking about this but not at end of life necessarily might motivate them to pursue a relationship with a death doula like yourself?
You know, I think really what it is facing mortality is hard. It just is. I mean, to really hold it and sit with it and be present with it in our consciousness. But I promise you, if we, you know, the concept of titrating medicine, we do a little at a time, right? Why would any of us leave it to the last possible minute to practice our dying? Why would we wait to practice for the first time when we're actually doing it, right? It's unfair. So truly, I do see engaging doulas. I see a couple of my doulas in the audience here, and engaging a doula at any point that you're willing to go kind of a little bit layer deeper, you're giving yourself a gift for the future. I had one client, and I remember at some point talking to her about her role as an elder, regardless of your chronological age, that how you meet this time in your life is going to have an influence in your constellation of care, the people around you. And she realized that her daughter-in-law had had a horrible, horrible encounter with death because her mom had had a very tragic and apparently traumatic death. And she said, you mean I could help her with this? I said, absolutely, you can. When she did die, with that kind of as something that she held as her North Star, and did the hard work of turning to face her dying, when she died and the hospice nurse came to pronounce, the hospice nurse turned and looked at me. She said, in 20 years of me doing this, I've never seen this, because she had died with a smile on her face. So I'm not going to say that's attainable for everybody and in every death, nor should that necessarily even be, you know, this is not a goal-oriented thing, okay? But we can largely shape the tenor, the feel of the cloth, the experience. Yeah.
I love the idea of the titrating medicine and preparing early. It actually reminds me of a quote that Frank Ostaseski has, which is that most people believe they'll be ready when the time comes, but to wait until the moment of death to begin to prepare is a tremendous gamble. To do what you were saying. Absolutely. The other question I wanted to ask you for the moment, Sarah, is especially here in the Bay Area and in Marin County, a lot of folks are aging by themselves. They live alone, and isolation is actually a real health challenge. How is your role helpful, maybe in particular for folks who may be isolated or find themselves alone or not near family, have other social connections?
Absolutely. And we get a lot of phone calls and outreach from, the demographic we call the solo agers, right? Sometimes even from adult children who are living out of state, who are super worried about their parents, saying, can you help? So yes, I think that's a really big, huge thing about it. That's why I love Vivalon, like having an opportunity to come and be in this community that is doing such beautiful work to do something about that isolation. Similarly, at its heart, doula work is community work. We were not intended to meet our dying time alone. Yes, we all leave this planet on our own terms, but we're not meant to face it without support. There's a man by the name of Stephen Jenkinson. He wrote a really seminal book called Die Wise that I highly recommend. It's about it's a manifesto for sanity of soul, and what it means to be dying in a death phobic culture that we're in. And he studied with a Native American tribe, Algonquins in Canada, where he lives, asking, what is it about the West that makes dying just so, so difficult? Anything you see culturally that really impacts us in a way that does not help our cause. And they said, because you center self. When you have community, when you have connection, things get easier. And so in that way, the relationship that you have with a doula is about finding that connection and making community, right? It is a way that we are trying to the best of our ability to smooth in some of those gaps that we find in the way that we've structured our way of life. To that point, I have to say, it's kind of, the work of the doula is interesting. It's very intimate work. I'm sure you found this in birth doula work too, right? It's such a beautiful, beautiful relationship. Sure, there are professional boundaries intact and standards of care and a code of conduct that we follow, but this is intimate work. I think my other doulas in the audience would be the first to tell you, we fall in love with all our clients. That's what happens, right? We share our hearts completely, right? Giving you safe space and permission to do the same too. So absolutely, I think especially here in the Bay Area, that's one of the ways we hope to fill in.
Great, thank you. Is there a practical side, especially if you're serving clients who may be living alone, in terms of setting up who else they need to be connected to?
Absolutely. So one of the things one of the big questions that we get a lot is, would you serve as my power of attorney for healthcare? So we've worked with a group called the International End of Life Doula Association, or INELDA, as they're called, along with NEDA, the National End of Life Doula Alliance, and asked them that very question. Because of course we want to do what we can to be of service. But the truth of the matter is we don't have any regulatory body that oversees our work, which in many ways makes the work we do more nimble and flexible. There are some advantages to it. But we found that the best thing we can do to keep you all safe and to keep, frankly, our field safe too, is to partner with a role of fiduciaries. Because fiduciaries are bound by law to act in your best interests, right? They actually have a professional fiduciary duty to do so. And so I have partnered many times with a fiduciary who is acting as a healthcare power of attorney, but I'm the one who's actually at the hospital or going into the home with hospice and seeing what's really happening and then reporting back to the fiduciary, right? So that's a really beautiful partnership that we have found that works. Similarly, too, estate attorneys are now referring out to us. The Advanced Healthcare Directive is not a form alone. This is a real inquiry into values, to really, truly understanding, what am I signing myself up for? And then how do I enable my power of attorney to step in confidently and do that right? And we facilitate a lot of those conversations. So again, back to the head and the hands work, there are very pragmatic parts to the work, even if we're kind of the Jackie and jacks of all trades. We try to cover a lot of different ground, the emotional centers, but also, yeah, absolutely looking at scaffolding things so that people are getting support that they need and the appropriate care team in place. Think of us as kind of, have you all the Love Boat, like Julie, the cruise director? Yeah, that's kind of what we do.
Thank you. Lorena, I think most people might have some general idea of what a funeral director might do, especially on a day-to-day level. Unfortunately, for many folks, that might be influenced by 6 Feet Under, as it was for me for many years. But I don't know if it'd be fair to say that there is what is a day in the life of a funeral director, but could you maybe share a couple of the more common, what are the lives in the days of a director might be?
Sure. It is, it's kind of one of those outlier professions for sure. And generally speaking, a day in the life is quite hectic, quite busy. I think at Valley, I've had a chance to step back and really appreciate the unique location we're in, because we don't have the same demands that other funeral homes do, that I've experienced in more densely populated areas, for example. So it's just kind of by chance that we're in this particular location. And um, generally speaking, we get these what we call first calls. When someone has passed away, we get that first call. So we are that point of contact, and it can look many different ways. Some folks have their things in order, and most of the time people don't. Some call in a state of panic and confusion, and some are being pressured by folks at the hospital to make a decision as to which funeral home they're going to be using, and they may not have had a chance to explore their options or to even know who they're calling. It's just the first person that pops up in their results, right? So that's part of the reason that we really try to get out into the community and let people be aware of their options. But the funeral director will take that first call, obtain, the information needed. One of the first things that we do is we gather the information for the death certificate. It's actually one of the first steps. And the funeral director has to then forward that information over to the health department of the county where the person passed. And they have to be in touch with that health department for the duration of, the time that we're trying to get legal documents in order, like the permit that's going to allow us to move forward with the type of disposition that that person selected. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work that happens as soon as we get that call. That process starts. So the funeral director is meeting with the family to get an understanding of what their preferences are. There are so many decisions that, to be totally honest, are a little awkward for us to ask in that moment, just because we know that people are going through one of the worst days of their lives, if not the worst. And we have to ask these questions. So many questions about their loved one's background, their parents' names, and where they were born. I mean, you can imagine that a child or just another family member or a friend sitting there might be quite overwhelmed by these questions. Sometimes people feel that they're invasive, right? But they are questions and decisions that we do have to move forward with, right? Time is often of the essence, and we have to very kindly and gently move forward with those items. And so I think it's a little bit difficult to balance that emotional side and understand where people are coming from, while trying to move this process forward. So we'll work with the families to decide what kind of ceremony or memorial we're going to be putting all of those pieces together, maybe communicating with clergy and coordinating, dates and times of things. And at the same time, working with our prep team who actually cares for the body. And, it's just an all-encompassing kind of role, right? So it's one that I feel very, very lucky to have, but there are so many moving parts, and we do our best to educate folks at that time and to help guide them to make decisions that make sense for their family, for their friend, for whoever it is that they're there for. It is a bit of a challenge when everything comes together at that moment and they're brand new to this experience. So that's why we're so excited to be having these conversations and just being able to share the knowledge that we have. There is no time, there's no perfect time to get started or to have these conversations. Whether that's with yourself, a friend, your family, being a funeral director in so many different areas in the Bay Area, you just realize that it doesn't have anything to do with age or health, even, sadly. It's really a bit of a harsh reality, and something that as funeral directors we're faced with every day. So, especially in Marin County, I think I find a lot of folks coming in at later and later ages to speak with me, and they'll say, well, I'm 95. I guess it's time I start looking into these things, and I think, wow, okay, let's get started, but I just being in this role, I am hyper aware that we're in line, to put it one way. And it is difficult, even being in this capacity. Mortality is something that's difficult to face. And I have to tell you that even if you're doing this every day and helping others through it, it's completely different when it's your loved one, when it's you filling out paperwork for your loved one, you're on the other side of that table, or even for yourself. It's very different when you feel like you're signing your life away and it's just a completely different feeling, but so, so important. Once you're able to take that step and put it behind you almost, right? It's really something. So I try to encourage folks to just get the conversation started, because there are so many things that in our society and in our circles that kind of keep us from it, whether it's our own discomfort with the topic, whether it's our discomfort bringing it up with our families, whether it's our children. It makes children very uncomfortable to talk about these things, or cultural, whatever it is. There are always things, and nobody wakes up excited to go shop for these things, or to visit a funeral home and start up a conversation, right? But it is really, really important. So I'm just so lucky as a funeral director to be able to engage in both roles, right? When a death does occur and helping the family through that process, and then also on the other side, meeting people when they're happy and maybe even joking about the matter, or they might, they're just in a better disposition when no one is necessarily ill or grieving, right? They're able to come in with a clear mind, to have these conversations.
You mentioned a dynamic that I had never thought of, which is someone may have lost a very close person to them or a loved one. It may be one of the worst days of their life. And then you're in the role of asking them all these questions, potentially logistical and mundane. How do you prepare for that? And how do you handle all the strong emotions? I'm imagining it starts with just shutting down with depression to anger. And you're there, yeah, causing that and having to hold that. What is that like for you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think the biggest thing is trying to meet people where they're at and trying really hard from that first conversation with them, whether it's on the phone or upon entering the room, trying to gauge where they are, trying to gauge whether they have any familiarity with this process and where they are emotionally. Some people are angry. And the thing is that none of us know how we're going to feel in that moment. I think that's, that's one of the biggest things in our profession, is that you don't know until you're in it. We can prepare all we want, or think that we know as much as we do. But once we're in that situation, emotions come up, not just for ourselves, but for maybe other people in our circle, other family members, that trigger different things, different dynamics, right? That maybe we weren't expecting, we weren't ready for. So I do walk into a lot of situations where it's very tense. It's a very tense room, and people disclose different things about their family's dynamic and whatnot, or what people are going through in that time. So we do try to be very sensitive about those things. And some people are angry. Some people don't understand why it costs so much money. Some people just want to push through. So I think that we see it all, and we just try to adapt as best as we can, so that we can ensure that everything is being taken care of, while not pushing them further, right, into those maybe not so positive emotions that they may be feeling at that time.
Yeah, thank you. You talked about someone preparing for their own pre-planning. I'd love to hear maybe a little bit more detail on what the pre-planning and pre-planning for a funeral looks like and what it entails, some more on the topics that are covered.
Sure. So one thing that I am so amazed by at Valley, and I really appreciate, is that we are ready to have this conversation at whatever stage you're at. Some people come in and they just want to know what we have, know what we offer, right? And maybe they're visiting different funeral homes, or what have you. At Valley, we're able to put together a file for people, for example, even if they're not ready to fund it, right? We're sitting down, we're going over all of their options, and maybe they have to check in with family. This is such a process, right? It's a conversation. It's something that doesn't always just involve that individual, but our circle, our community. So it often takes a couple of visits. One of the first things that we do, again, is gather that initial information so that we can have it ready for the time of need. So your personal information for the death certificate, we explore everything that we offer, right, as far as funeral services and cemetery options as well, whether you're inclined towards cremation and what those options are. Some people want to have a memorial service in our chapel, followed by placement at the cemetery. Other folks might opt for scattering, or a number of things, right? And other folks go the more traditional route. They want to have a service in their church or their parish or what have you. And we're able to meet all of those needs, but it's important to know what's available, what even is possible, so that you can start narrowing those things down. And we're happy to sit down and go through that, provide you any estimate that you might need. And then I think, the most important part, and kind of reassuring, I'd say, is that we are taking down the information for your next of kin and figuring out whether you have an advanced healthcare in place already that we can have on file for the time of need, so that when it does happen, we don't actually need anything from that person. We have everything already. So really, we're just reaching out to them. We're just confirming everything that you already discussed with us, that you selected. And that actually becomes a living file. Hopefully, you'll come in with us. We'll have the conversation. You'll live many, many more years. And over the course of those years, you can update your file. Maybe you'll update your healthcare directive. Maybe there are things that you want to say that you aren't comfortable saying right now to your family, but you want to have for them at that time. That can go in your file. Some people get excited and they write their own obituaries. So at any point, you can add to that file and that will be there for the time of need. So really, it all starts with that initial conversation. You don't have to feel pressured. You don't have to feel like you're going to be sold something you don't want. In fact, that is one of the biggest advantages of pre-planning, is that there is no emotional spending. You are not in grief. You're not under duress. You are there with a clear mind, making decisions for yourself that make sense for you, for your values, for your circle.
I'm curious, what would you say on average is the percentage of your time spent on pre-planned services like you've been talking about versus, if you will, real time or at death or right after death services?
Yeah, so when someone does have a prearrangement, it makes everything so much smoother. We have a direct point of contact. We have the legal paperwork that we need to move the process forward, and we have just everything on file. We can get every single one of those processes started. I would say that, of course, in our perfect world, everyone would have a prearrangement, but that's not the case. In Marin County, I do find that it's higher than in other places, but I would say roughly 30% of folks come in with a prearrangement. We get the call and we're told that, there is a prearrangement on file and we can go ahead and move forward with that. A lot of folks do give us a call without anything set up ahead of time. And that is not a problem. You don't have to have one in place to give us a call. We get these calls all the time, 24/7. We go out, we bring folks into our care. We don't need a deposit or anything ahead of time to bring someone into our care, but it does make the process a lot easier.
Thank you. Sarah, you talked about the constellation of care and having to support both the person who, say, is actively dying and their caregivers and their loved ones. What happens when the person who is actively dying actually passes? What is your role at that point forward, and how do you support after the death?
Yeah. So, depending upon the engagement and when I was brought into the picture, when we doulas come on in, because at any point we can be engaged, very similar to what Lorena was saying. I've been asked to come when somebody was actively dying. Literally, they were 4 days away from death and in the labor of death when I met them, right? So we can be engaged at various points throughout the process as well. But if we were engaged upstream, and we've tended to the work of the head and the hands, then we've worked with people like Lorena, the funeral directors and their teams, to have everything arranged. And honestly, I have to say, in terms of the people that I interface with the most in my work, healthcare clinicians, as you can imagine, it's not just the family, but it's all the people who are providing support to my client. I really have to say, I love me some funeral directors. They're some of the most empathetic, just helpful, earnestly want to support you people. And so typically after death, hopefully we have a pre-need already in place with the funeral home of choice. I will be there through that active dying period. And then one of the things we doulas say is death is not an emergency in most instances. There's a really beautiful poem, and I can't attribute it to anybody because I don't remember who did it, but if the doulas in the audience know, keep me honest, but it says, go ahead after death has occurred. For those who are there, just take a seat, go put the kettle on, make a cup of tea, just relax for a moment, right? Not an emergency. There's nothing more to do. And so doulas really kind of try to bring that energy into the space, right, of the vigil period. And so hopefully we're not feeling a lot of anxiety around things. And, and then when it's appropriate, a hospice nurse typically comes out to a home to pronounce, or a medical practitioner needs to be the one to pronounce the death. That's not something doulas can do. So we will call, usually a hospice is engaged if they're a client of mine. We call hospice. The hospice comes and pronounces. And then the hospice nurse will typically call the mortuary. On certain occasions, people want a little bit of time with their loved one. And so I've actually worked with funeral homes and said, hey, can we have some time? And up to 24 hours is more than reasonable to keep your loved one at home. It doesn't have to be this rush. But for some people who want to move forward, that's entirely okay too, right? And, funeral homes are really accommodating in that way. And so if the nurse doesn't make the phone call, then typically I will make that call to the funeral home when it's time for transport. And then transport comes to remove the body. And I, as doula, and most of the doulas I know, we will work with the family to prepare them ahead of time of what to expect with transport, that the gurney will come in and the actual logistical steps to expect, and let the constellation of care, the family members, the friends, make their own decisions about whether or not they want to be present for that, or if they want to take a walk, go outside, sip some tea, and then they can feel good about knowing that the doula is there to support that process. And then the body is taken under the care of the funeral home. Yeah.
In listening to you, a question just occurs to me. How do you navigate the relationships with people after the passing of the person or the client? Do you ever find yourself struggling with boundaries? Do you find people who don't want to stop working with you? Do you need to, if you will, cut people off? Are there any professional boundaries around that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because as I was saying about the intimacy of the work, right? So one of the things I say is that if we can talk about death, we doulas, we can probably talk about most things. And it's about making the implicit explicit. So I have something that I have in my practice where when an engagement is done based on the kind of contractual terms of what we decided the kind of endpoint would be, I name it. This is the end of our professional relationship. Do you agree? Usually before we even find ourselves in that point, I've spoken with them upstream a little bit around, just know that after death, constellation of care, if you are wanting some early bereavement support, again, we're not grief therapists, but sometimes when you're the person who was there witnessing the death of their loved one, it's a secondary loss if we remove ourselves too immediately, right? But we kind of just have very open conversations about what that is. What's amazing to me is my clients are self-regulating. And what I mean by that is there is, sometimes this can happen with any relationship. You take shinings to certain people, and there's a woman, she and I both enjoy hiking. She was the daughter of one of my clients, and it morphed into a friendship. That doesn't happen in all cases, but in this case it did. And I got to tell you, there was one day she called me when her father was admitted to the hospital. I had helped her with her mother. And she said, I don't need doula Sarah, I need doula Sarah today, right? And so we just have that kind of open dialogue around when is the relationship ending and how do we want to kind of finish well and in integrity and make sure nobody feels that there are loose threads and that nothing is left kind of just out there. Yeah.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, please write them down on the note card that should have been on your seat, and raise your hand and a staff member will bring them up to me. And we're going to jump into those questions in a moment. But one other question I'd like to ask for both of you, as someone who doesn't do this work, just listening to the both of you, it sounds so emotionally intense and, as you said, intimate. how do you take care of yourselves? What does self-care look like for you in your work?
One of the things about this work is that it is extremely grounding. There's something really, it gives you so much perspective to feel the exhaustion, because there is real exhaustion that comes from being emotionally available to everyone you encounter in a day. And it's quite often that we meet with several families in a single day that are going through this. So to experience that at the end of the day, and then you remember those families, and that, like I said before, this is the worst day for them, that your mundane problems, it's not that they're not valid, but they're just not as big as you thought they were. There's a solution, right? There's a solution, and I just find the work so incredibly grounding. Being able to talk with people that do similar work is also very therapeutic for me in particular. And just being able to share, these stories, and to get some support around that, because like I said, not everyone is in, a great disposition when you meet with them. So it does take some camaraderie there as well. So I'm very grateful for the folks that I work with. I think having that support is very important. And I think people in this industry are probably by nature very reflective folks. So taking time and carving out time to engage in that reflection, I think is crucial for me. So those are the main ways.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. And I think it's really true. I cannot tell you exponentially my gratitude has grown. I see things so differently now that I do this work. So that even when the pressure does kind of come, there is a sense of being able to right size it. As Lorena was saying, I'm far less reactive than I have been in my corporate job. I can tell you that. I can just be really present in my day-to-day life, and that has been such a reward. And I have little practices that I have too, that I try to honor. I have a memorial garden in my yard for my clients, that I have to tend to my own grief because of that intimacy you have. It's not a removed situation. I grieve my clients, ideally not more than their constellation of care, but I have to tend to my own grief too. So there's a bit of hygiene, I would say. And I love what Lorena said about the kind of collegial nature. I might pick up the phone and call another doula if I need support, and they'll get it. But you learn in these kind of caring professions that you can't pour from an empty cup. So the self-care, you kind of find yourself dialing that up quite a bit. And, I have two really dear friends of mine who are oncology nurses at UCSF. We all were friends before they became nurses, before I became a doula. And they talk all the time about this disembodied grief that they hold, and just the kind of tension that resides in their body. And they just look at me and they're like, I don't understand how you do what you do, and you seem to be okay. And I think there's just something about the way that we show up into this time of people's lives, that it's just more of a virtuous cycle because of the humanity that gets to be at the forefront. So in certain ways, it fills me up. And perhaps Lorena and I too are just in right work.
Yeah. A couple of folks want to talk about money.
Sure.
And in particular, what it would take, or how does it work if they want to utilize a death doula? Is it an hourly, or how does that work? Does insurance cover anything, or long-term care insurance? What's involved?
Yeah. So it's different for every doula. So certainly when you're reaching, I always say interview a few doulas, by the way. Your doula is going to feel like a comfortable slipper that you've had for 20 years that still gives you great arch support, but it doesn't stink. That's your doula. Because here's the deal, you don't have the time to see if the relationship's going to work out in most cases. So just, it should feel right from the start. Shouldn't feel like anything you have to force. Find the doula that's right for you. Most of us do work on an hourly rate. And I would say in the Bay that rate is anywhere from $75 an hour up to about $250 an hour. The doulas who kind of fetch that higher rate tend to be folks who come from clinical backgrounds. They were nurses or physicians, and they have that degree of expertise that is a degree of security for some people, and they like that. But we have oftentimes, as crass as it sounds, what we call the package rates, right? Where if we're able to scope an engagement, what is it that we want to do? I want to complete my advanced healthcare directive. Many of us have it sorted that we know how many sessions it's going to take. We have a fairly repeatable process in place, and then we can have just a kind of set rate for that. In terms of insurance, no. Sadly, at this point in time, Medicare and Medi-Cal do not reimburse for death doula services. So this is an out-of-pocket expense. Interestingly, FSA or the HSA is the health savings accounts. Sometimes those funds can be utilized for death doula services. And interestingly enough, there are some organizations, I'm going to say, okay, Benioff, looking at Salesforce, that actually have it as a benefit for their employees. So that's another kind of unique thing that is just starting to happen as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really like this question. I'm curious what you both have to say about it. What are your experiences and what would you say are the effects of the ageism that is rampant in our culture as it relates to death and dying?
I find it quite fascinating just because we're all just a step from it. And I think that there is this general feeling that we're all going to be young forever or something, especially with the rise of social media. It's something that is so, it's just pushed on us. Everything that we see from, ads to, general interests, it's just youth and flashiness and beauty. And it just adds to this already existing avoidance of not just death, but aging. So I think that it's this component that is almost entirely absent from our consciousness. And I'm sure that, primarily in the West, it more so than in other places, but it's something that is so detrimental to our society and our circles, because then we're not able to properly engage with older folks in our community, and we're just kind of pushing these things to the side, right? And of course, we work with a lot of older folks, and there's often quite a disconnect between their concerns and their values and maybe their children, right? Not being able to bridge that gap. I think that another thing that's happening and that just kind of comes to mind is just the general isolation that is just on the rise as a result of all of these things. I think that a lot of people are finding themselves more and more isolated, in part because of this general ageism in our culture. But even young people, I mean, it's kind of across the board that it's happening. And something that you mentioned earlier, Sarah, is folks who are going through this and embarking on this journey alone. It's just, I think that in this field and in general, we kind of take it for granted that people had children in their life, or that they have some extensive, extended family or something, and that they have these support groups. And that's not always the case. I talk to a lot of folks who, in my experience, come across as more vulnerable. This is a more vulnerable experience for them. And they have to be that much braver coming to talk to me about these things, because maybe for the first time in their lives, they have to say out loud that they're not sure who will step up to this role when it does happen, when it does inevitably happen. And that is something that is so real to me in my work, is that we do take for granted that, you know, people have these circles, and that is just not the reality. It's not always the case. So I really, really have those folks at the forefront. And I encourage folks to come talk to us, because it is a very vulnerable topic. And there are answers, there are resources, there's a way to go through this, not alone.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that, sir?
I just, you know, I mean, I feel so passionately about reclaiming the role of the elder. It's something that we've really lost, as I had kind of mentioned before. And I have a lot of things I could get on a soapbox about things that we're doing not so well these days, but I'll refrain from going too deeply into that, except to say that everything Lorena said is true. You know, I think there is this artifice that we have to kind of hold up, that we have everything kind of all together. And I think in death work, we get to see behind that curtain, behind the artifice, because essentially that really is what death is about, finding a way to drop that and being present to what really is. And hopefully the work that we do is part of the process of righting what I think is really, truly a wrong.
Yeah. I really love that idea of reclaiming the role of the elder. It reminds me, one of my favorite books is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, right? And he says, for the vast majority of human history, people have always tried to look older than they are, to have that respect from society. And if you think about what our society today tries to do around that, it says something. We have several questions about cremation. And so I'm just going to throw a few out there. A couple I think are fairly easily answered. First one is, does Valley have an on-site cremation or crematory?
Yes, we do. Not all funeral homes do. There are a ton of cremation services out there. Some of them are even online, where you'll just have the cremated remains shipped to you. But you don't know where your loved one is going. So we really take pride in having a crematory on site. If you are exploring funeral homes, I do encourage you to ask that. It's a super important question. It's nice to know where these things are actually taking place. So yes, Valley does have one on site. Once someone comes into our care, that's where they will be for the duration until disposition.
And can you talk a little bit more about how the cremation process works in terms of, how does, do you did someone call you for that? The pre-planning that's done around that?
Yeah, so cremation has become more and more popular in the last few decades. And in Marin County, I would say it is the most popular option. So most of our cases are for cremation. That's what people select most often. And we can, if we have the pre-arrangement, like I said previously, very, very smooth. Everything gets started right away. I would say the general timeline for these things, if someone died of natural causes and under medical care, I would say, within 3 days or so, we'll be receiving the permit that we need to carry out the cremation. So all in all, in a week's time, we should have everything wrapped up for the family. But the initial process is going to be the same, whether you have a prearrangement or not. It's about that phone call, just remembering to communicate to your loved ones, to your family, or whoever it is, a friend that is stepping up to that role, that your funeral home of choice is Valley or whatever it may be. Because it's going to come down to those 2 phone calls. First, the medical professional that's going to pronounce the passing, and then the funeral home. And then we're going to take it from there. There's not a whole lot for the survivors to do at that point. We're going to be reaching out to them and walking them through that process. So it's about, remembering those 2 things. The cremation process, you know, we're so lucky to have the crematory on site, and we offer traditional cremation. I think in more recent times, different forms of cremation have been passed into law, but we offer traditional cremation at our facility.
Someone wants to know if you pre-plan and prepay for your cremation, but then you move out of the area, how is that handled?
That's a great question. So the state of California requires funeral homes to place these funds, if you do decide to fund your pre-arrangement, with an insurance trust more often than not. And that is entirely for consumer protection. We are actually seeing this play out right now. It's kind of a unique situation, and some of you may be aware, but we've had a few funeral homes close in our area in Marin County. The Keaton's locations in Novato and San Rafael have closed. It's not something that happens often. It's kind of a bit of a shock to all of us when it does. But here in this example, we are seeing this, you know, the protection of this law play out. So the folks who had pre-arrangements there and they funded those, their money is safe, even though the funeral home went under or whatever the reasons for closing were. Their money is kept in this insurance trust until the time of need. So when the death does occur, the funeral home has to prove that the person did in fact pass away, and they're the ones to work with that insurance provider. So it's not the family that has to deal with anything complicated at all. It's the funeral home. And it's as simple as reassigning those funds to the new funeral home. So if, say, you had a pre-arrangement at Valley Memorial Park, we use Great Western Insurance. We just happen to use that provider. And if you do move out of the area, you could choose to have those funds reassigned to your new local funeral home. What you would do is you would go to that funeral home. You would say, I have this pre-arrangement over in California. I am looking to set up a pre-arrangement here. And they would be able to apply those funds towards the service that you're actually going to be receiving there. It's no problem at all. If you, say, are traveling to a different state and you didn't have time to make those new arrangements ahead of time, you'll want to be cremated locally, wherever it is that you passed, and we'll just be notified, and those funds will go back to your estate. So there really is no reason not to. That money will be safe and it will be used for those purposes.
Thank you. We have a few questions around really looking at how to support or even deal with the people around the person who may be actively dying. So one person wants to know that oftentimes people are nervous or even afraid about talking about their death to their children or about their end of life wishes. And a finer point on that is sometimes the children don't want to talk about that and will shut the person down even if they do want to talk about it. How do you navigate those two situations in terms of encouraging someone or guiding someone to talk about death to their children? And what do you suggest when someone's kids do not want to talk to them about their death?
I think there's something that comes with having a degree of neutrality that I bring, which is almost an unfair advantage. I have a client who recently died, and I remember the first day that I met, his wife intuited they needed some sort of support. So they had lived in Berkeley. I went to the house. My client was there, one of the adult daughters and the wife. And everybody was nervous, you know. And I remember kind of coming in because they'd had real struggles trying to have the actual conversation of what was happening really right in front of them. And the daughter even looked at me and said, "How are we going to do this? Like, I don't understand." Well, we have some tools. So one that I highly recommend, which I use with this family, is called Go Wish. It's a pack of cards. There are 36 questions in those cards that ask very specific questions around what kind of care would you need? And I know it sounds really wild to start with a game of cards, but even upstream from Go Wish, which talks very specifically about desires, needs, and wishes, there's a deck called the Death Deck. I kid you not. That's actually kind of cheeky and funny. It has, I don't know, 300 cards in it that have just kind of general questions around how do you feel around death or dying? But again, it's that titrating. I think what we need to do is just are there tools that can get the focus from us looking at one another to looking together out at something else, kind of change that locus of focus. I know that sounded really corny, but if we can start to kind of look at how do we get people kind of side by side rather than head to head. And I think that's just something that happens naturally for the doula role, because we can facilitate these conversations with a bit more ease, I think, than folks who are trying to go it alone. But if you're struggling to have open conversations with your children, or they're shutting it down, the best way to really go at that is to ask a direct question. If we can't talk about this now, when can we talk about it? If not now, when? Or put some parameters around it. Okay, I understand this is going to make you uncomfortable. Could we dedicate 15 minutes of time just to start and see how it goes? Just give us a little, it's that titrating, and see what they can handle and see what they can't. And honestly, if they're really, really reticent or downright resistant, it might be helpful to have a professional kind of come into the picture and help you negotiate that. Because the hardest thing is when you have, say, a parent and a child who find themselves at an impasse, and then there is that kind of interlock where they're not really getting past it, and you need some sort of intervention to come and help. And so if just having the direct conversation, if I can't have this conversation with you now, please tell me when, or could we try a little bit? If none of those are working, consider, honestly, a doula to help you with that. Oh, and writing things down is one of the recommendations from the audience. Yes, letters, maybe a different mode of how we communicate about these things. A little bit of space. I love that. That's right. And leaning into how somebody's showing up in the world. Are they an extrovert, introvert? That's great for the introvert friends we have who need a little space to think about it and be with it. But remember that there are a lot of people who really do want to just stick their head in the proverbial sand. And when it comes to thinking about losing our parents, that's difficult. It makes it very real for people. But again, I think it's just that titration a little bit at a time and setting up safety and parameters around it.
And just to clarify one point, you referred to needing to bring in a professional at one point. You're referring to like a therapist or a counselor?
Well, no, I meant a doula. But
no, but if you're someone's working with you.
Yeah.
No.
If they are doing it on their own.
I see. Okay.
Like this family was. I didn't really tell that story well, did I? The family had been trying to have the conversation about death and dying and finding out from the father/husband what he wanted, and they weren't really getting very far. They were just as a family not able to shift it and get into a meaningful dialogue. And in that first meeting, I didn't finish the story. Thank you. We used the Go Wish cards, 36 questions. What's very important to you? What's somewhat important to you? What's not important to you at all? By the time we were done with that facilitated conversation, the daughter pulled me aside later. She said, we got further knowing about what's important to my dad than we have in the last 8 months that we've been trying to figure it out. So sometimes just a little tool like the Go Wish cards can be a game changer.
And I see this all the time.
Yeah.
Folks who come in, and it's not even just the children that are uncomfortable, it's the spouse a lot of the time.
Yes.
That just does not want to talk about these things. They don't want to know anything about it. I'll tell you, my mother went behind my dad's back and set everything up because she was very just aware that it was going to fall on me and my siblings. So don't let that hold you back. It's one of those things that's hard enough to even get yourself to muster up the will to go and have the conversation with one of us. That anytime that you face that little bit of resistance, it just kind of shuts you down, and it sets you back a little bit in that process. And I think that there are different ways to go about it, but I am very just aware of how uncomfortable it is for some people, and it makes some people downright angry, you know, and you don't want that. You don't want to trigger that. Definitely gauge where your children are at or your spouse with this, and because you don't want it to be a stressful situation for you. It is very important. It is a gift at the end of the day that you're leaving for them. You've made decisions for your children that maybe weren't their favorite in the past as they were growing up, but it was in their best interest. And that is what this is. Whether they realize it right now or not, that is what you're doing for them. And the same goes for anyone else in your life. So I would say, you know, what I've seen is that sometimes it comes down to them seeing how serious you are about it, because sometimes it's just floated as this general topic, and other times you're saying, okay, this much time has passed, I've brought it up this many times, nothing has come of it. I am ready to go have this initial conversation with a funeral director. I'm going to go to the funeral home next week, and I would feel so much better if you were with me. You know, it would really help me to have you by my side and to maybe ask some questions that, you know, don't come to mind. And sometimes that triggers a different response. And once we do get someone in and we start going through the process, it quickly becomes apparent how important this is, and just the vast amount of information that we're covering, that they're glad they came.
Thank you.
That's a great question. No.
Can you repeat it? The question.
Yes. So the question is, do you go straight to a crematorium, or do you have the choice of going directly to a crematorium versus using a funeral home and then going there? Any crematorium is going to only cremate folks who are working with a funeral home. So, for example, for many years, Valley Memorial Park just had a crematory, and they would cremate for funeral homes in the area that didn't have a crematory on site. So they do have to work with the funeral home. You will be working with the funeral home. They're going to be the ones to file for the permit and all of this, that they will present and submit to the crematory.
This is a very poignant question, and I apologize to the author because I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but I don't think the meaning gets lost. Can you both talk about what the experience is like in your professions when you are providing your services for a child who's dying?
You know, I think one of the things I did, we have this concept in the doula world of do our own work, right? When I first started doing this work, I did A Year to Live, Stephen Levine's A Year to Live, where I contemplated my mortality very intentionally every day. I would wake up and put a bracelet of skulls around my wrist and say, today may be the day, and then had practices that I engaged in very thoroughly. We have to do our own hygiene. For me personally, I was wondering, given the fact that I had early maternal loss at the age of 4, how that was going to be for me, if I was going to be okay to be of support to children who are dying, or if in some strange way, given some of what was truly a traumatic event, might show up or surface there. So I went and I started working initially with children in grief, because anybody when a dying time is near is in grief. As soon as the diagnosis came into play, grief has entered the room, right? So I worked with Kara, which supports families who are bereaved, and I worked with the kiddos, and they taught me so many beautiful things. Children in grief are stupendous, and children who are dying are also in their own grief, and generally tending to the grief of the adults around them in ways that might be very surprising. But I think what Lorena had said was really relevant. When you do the work that we do, we understand that old age is not guaranteed. And that's part of the hygiene that we do. I mean, we may interface with it very directly in seeing children who are dying or who have died. But I think, you know, both she and I have been in the fields that we've been in long enough to know that elderhood, as I've been talking about, the gift of elderhood, telling a child that you have a role to teach the adults in your life. They step right into it. It's not about the chronological age. So yes, well, it has its own bittersweetness. I think there is some kind of measured understanding that death can come at any time that both Lorena and I are quite aware of.
Do you want to add to that?
Yes, I have to say that there is nothing harder than these situations that, you know, they do come to us, and it's so different. It just feels so different to support a family going through that. I think we all kind of take a step back. You know, we're as sensitive as possible, you know, with anyone that comes to us. But when it's this situation, it is just so different working with these parents, working with these families. And I think it takes a particular sensitivity to work with them, and to figure out, like I said before, where they're at. Because on my end, you know, I don't come across a lot of pre-planning for that. I think that there's so much hope right up until the end, you know, in these situations. There's always hope. And so when I meet with these folks, generally a death has occurred, I have to say. And it's about meeting them at that point. All of the funeral homes that I've worked for in the past, and certainly Valley, they take great care to provide as many options for the family as possible, and to maybe support them financially in whatever way is possible as well. We waive a lot of services when it's a very young child. And we do everything that's possible, because I think across the board, and certainly in our industry, we understand the devastation that this is.
Thank you both for your very thoughtful responses to that. This is a question I think is really interesting too. What would you say are the 2 or 3 things you would recommend to children? And it's not specified here, but I suppose this could be for younger kids as opposed to adult children as well. But what are the 2 or 3 things you would recommend to children that they should be sure to say to a dying parent, especially to ease the worries or anxiety a parent might have in passing about their kids?
Wow. You guys really came up with amazing questions tonight.
These are great questions.
Wow. That's a beautiful question. And you know, you're going to have a different experience. We meet folks at slightly different places, right? But as far as what I've been able to reflect on is that the dying parent wants to know that you're okay, that you're going to be okay, you know? And I think that they really need that reassurance, because they have probably done the impossible in their life to ensure exactly this. So being able to just be present, hold their hand, really be present. I think that when these things come about, depending on what stage you're in of prearranging, or, you know, maybe the children are making trips to the hospital or whatnot, some people find it that they want to focus and laser in on their to-do list. And they're like, oh my God, these things are happening. Let me check these things off. What else could I be doing right now? And what you could be doing is just be present, because it's not so much about you as a child, it's about them and this moment. So when people call us and they say, you know, my loved one is, you know, in the hospital, the doctors are telling us they just don't know, it might be a few hours, a few days, we say, yes, you know, we can give you very general information. It's going to be okay. You give us a call, but go and be with your loved one. You don't want to be on the highway when you get the call, if you can avoid it, right? Be present, reassure that person that they were everything in your life, that they did their job, and that you're okay, that you really are okay, and that you're grateful for them. That in a nutshell, I think is you know, what will ease their path.
You know, I fully agree with letting them know it's okay to go and that you're going to be okay, being just kind of a general good rule of thumb. And also, this is what I mean by the heart work. Hopefully, a lot of good conversations have happened, even leading up to the active dying period, right? That we're not letting so many things go, being left unsaid. You know, but there's an opportunity to, all relationships are different, and certain parent-child relationships are challenging too, right? So I think it's okay to speak from your heart and to be able to have that kind of private last expression of whatever feels true. For some people, it may take the form, for many of us and most of us, of gratitude and thank you. But if there's some challenge and pain that's there too, it's okay to voice that and say, this was really difficult for me and I wish we had resolved it more than we did. But know that it's okay. There is this kind of concept of no, it's okay. So I guess what I'm advocating for is maybe not the saccharine view of things. Don't force something that isn't true. I'm saying that more for people in the room who may be with people who are dying and struggling. I want to advocate for the fact that you don't have to say something that is out of alignment with the experience of the relationship you have with this person, that it's okay to speak your heart, but to do so in a way that feels like you can allow some degree of completion and a full circled honoring. It should still be honoring of you and that individual. And it's okay if it isn't maybe as easy as you wish it was. It's okay to tell the truth. They can handle it.
Thank you both. Just keeping an eye on the clock, we have a couple more questions. I'm going to ask if maybe we can get them through a little bit more quickly. Maybe one of you can take each of them. First of all, Sarah, when a person has dementia, how does that change the relationship in terms of your work as a doula?
Yeah. So, you know, in terms of dementia, it's interesting. There's a beautiful New York Times article about dementia is a place. And I really love that. And I think it's something that I kind of bring into my work when I have a client who does have dementia and Alzheimer's. It's about trying to be a bridge. Doulas are bridges to deeper engagement. And I think some of the time when we work with clients who have especially advanced stage dementia, there has been a disconnect because their family knew them at a time when they were in a different cognitive place. And it can be really frightening for the constellation of care and challenging and not really knowing how to engage with their loved one in this new way. So as doulas, we kind of, again, bridge that gap and help family members and whomever is that in that constellation of care, invite them to join us in the space of dementia being a place where no, we don't have to remind our mother that that didn't happen yesterday, or no, we don't have to insist with our father that he is wrong about this detail. I can work with them on the grief and the bereavement that comes along with that, because you're grieving the loss of somebody in a different way. But don't rob yourself of the joy of engaging with the person as they are today. And hopefully we can allow for that new connection to emerge and to really honor the person as they are. It's just about building new networks for connection and relation.
I'm going to totally contradict myself. I'd love both of you to answer this next question, please. What sort of training or formal training is required for your respective professions?
Sure. So folks who know they want to do this from a younger age, like I said, this has been a second career for me. So those folks go through a mortuary program. There is such a thing at different colleges. They're not super popular. There's like one in Southern California, one in Northern California. And as you're going through the program, it's generally a 2-year program, but there may be an apprentice involved that's longer if you are going the embalming route. So there are different licenses that you will eventually obtain. So there is a state license for funeral directors, for anyone that deals with cemetery property and the sale of that. And then certainly for embalming, there is another license issued by the state, and everything is very regulated. It's a difficult process. And so a lot of folks go through that program, and I think it's a very, very valuable program. For me, it was a little bit of a different experience. I went through, again, my more traditional path in education. So I obtained a bachelor's degree, a master's degree in education, and taught for a few years, and then decided to start really with just hands-on training at a funeral home and worked my way up from there. And I was able to, with that educational background, go ahead and obtain these different licenses that way. So there are those different paths, but it is very regulated, and folks tend to choose one of these tracks for the most part. Some folks are better suited for one of these.
And on the other side, I come from a field that really is not regulated. There is no licensing for end-of-life doulas or death doulas. But as I mentioned before, there is NEDA, the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, that really has been working for years now to set standards of care that most doulas, people who are trained in being end-of-life doulas, have gone through their NEDA exam. And there are multiple training bodies that exist that are highly regarded and well respected. And most of the curriculum is kind of focused and centered around what those standards of care are. But those trainings can be very, they can vary quite a bit, anywhere from full immersive kind of 6-week programs to also workshops that exist. I would say that there's no such thing as a doula who isn't constantly and chronically self-educating. There's always something new to learn, and there are plenty of great training organizations out there that are doing that and supporting doulas on their way.
Thank you. What for any actually staff were there any questions online from the Zoom audience? Okay. Oh, you already brought them up. Thank you. For anyone in the room or online that might have interest in learning more about specifically working with either of you in your professions, what would next steps be?
On my end, next steps would be to just give us a call. We have, and I don't know if for the folks online, you guys can provide that. Okay.
Okay.
That's good to know. Yeah, so we have a ton of resources back there from Valley Memorial Park. And again, it's just a matter of giving us a call and scheduling an appointment. We highly encourage appointments just to make sure that we are available to give you all of the time and focus that these conversations require. And then just kind of on that point back there, we have some pre-planning guides that are super informative. They really kind of walk you through all of these questions that will come up and that are really valuable to just have on hand or share with your loved ones. So we have a couple of booklets back there for that. and as well as my card, of course. And I did print out some advanced healthcare directives for those of you who don't have one, who don't want to go talk to your doctor about it right now, or you need to update. You just grab one of those, you update it, and the way to make it enforceable is to just have it notarized or have 2 signing witnesses. And it's as easy as that. You'll share that with your medical provider, with the person that you list there or the folks that you list on the directive. And if you come see me, your funeral home. So we'll have that on file as well.
I am part of a collective. I actually have one of my co-doulas, Diane Button, is sitting in the front row today, called the Bay Area End of Life Doula Alliance. So you can find us. There's a contact form through our website. And I work there with my 3 doula partners who are lovely. We do have some trifolds in the back and some business cards with my name on it directly as well. If you want to reach out to me specifically, feel free. And then I know Yvonne is in the back of the room letting us know that we're going to send some of these assets digitally too. So you'll be able to reach us that way at the end of this.
We have a couple of moments left. Would either of you want to share a final thought before we close? And I don't mean to put you on the spot if you don't come in.
I would just like to reiterate that there is no right time to have this conversation. You're all just so welcome to just sit with us. This, I think, has been a super special, unique opportunity to be able to engage in this format. And Sarah, thank you for encouraging that. I just am so grateful for the opportunity to talk to you guys tonight in this kind of intimate way. And even more so if you come over and schedule a visit with me. I think it's going to be really, really productive. I look forward to meeting you guys and to learning about your preferences and your needs and your interests in all of this at any stage that you are at in the process. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Yeah, very
Sarah?
much. With everything Lorena said, yeah, thank you so much for having us here too, Vivalon. It's been just great. You know, I can't help, I have to say it. Thinking about and talking about death isn't going to kill you.
That's right.
And this time that we've had together is proof of that, right? So just a little bit at a time, everybody, just a little bit at a time. Thank you so much for your attention and your warm hearts. We appreciate them. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. What a rich conversation. Thank you both so much. Thank you for sharing so much humanity with us in the last couple of hours. Thank you so much. And if, as was mentioned, there's resources in the back, or if you have any questions. Paige, do you have anything
Yeah,
else?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for doing this and bringing this conversation that we never have out into the world. It was very illuminating and very touching. So thank you. Appreciate you. I want to remind everyone real quick that we do have more estate planning workshops planned. Somebody mentioned a fiduciary. We get a lot of questions about fiduciaries. Our next workshop in August will have a fiduciary here that you can meet and ask questions. Let's please give our presenters here a great big warm welcome. Thank you. We really appreciate you. I think we'll have to do this again.
Yes.